this whole webinar is just an hour, and I apologize, but it's all we've got. And so I'm going to introduce myself, but specifically, this is about helping students recover language after COVID-19. And I know there's a little bit of a debate as to like how much skills are lost. And yes, we're going to go over that. So I just want to make sure that you have the idea that this is not comprehensive. I couldn't possibly give you all this information in an hour, right? So let's get started with just a brief little intro about myself. I am the new Dissemination and Implementation Specialist for Language Dynamics Group. I am a PhD candidate at the University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida. Trina Spencer, one of the co-creators of Story Champs, right, is my advisor. So that's how I found my way into this wonderful world of storytelling. Now, specifically for me, my interests, in case it's relevant and why I love this topic about COVID-19 and the power of storytelling, is that storytelling is portable, right? You don't need materials. We use them for the whole curriculum and the intervention of Story Champs, but just the mere behavior of storytelling and sharing information and passing along history and culture, that doesn't require materials. And so hopefully one day I will help Language Dynamics Group bring this a little bit to scale to children who are refugees and migrants. And so yeah, stay tuned. Hopefully in the next, I don't know, big dreams, 5 years, we can get that going as an intervention to help kids access education in those camps. But back before I was in this role and before I was a PhD student, I was a teacher. So I do have some background and knowledge about what it's like to have to assess and implement interventions and differentiation. However, I was fortunate enough not to be a teacher during a pandemic. So I do want to note that my experiences are different from those of you who are in the classroom and in the school setting. I've been in academia during this time. All right. So what we are doing today, and I do want to ask you if you want me to stop or clarify, go ahead in the Q&A section. You can directly ask a question in the Q&A and I will see a little bubble pop up. I'm just going to warn you, the chat feature is going to be harder for me to monitor because there's so many of you. So use the Q&A if you want me to stop and answer a question. All right, so we're going to go over what we know already about the educational impacts of COVID-19 and the pandemic. We're also going to have a little introduction to oral narrative language and what it is in a general sense. And then we're going to go into kind of what we don't know, and at least how do we go about figuring out where kids are as they're returning to school and where they are throughout the school year, given that we kind of don't know what's going to happen next with this new Delta variant. So yeah, this unease and this increase in anxiety that we all are feeling definitely trickles down to the students and the kids. Then we're going to talk about how to address the COVID-19 slide. That's what is being referred to in some of the posts and literature and blogs, guidance from governments and education departments. But we don't really know how much and to what degree globally, or actually more universally, to what degree have students regressed in their language skills. We have some data, I'm going to present that. And if we use that as a jumping off point, maybe that's just kind of, it doesn't look good. So maybe we'll use that as baseline to then what can we do? And then we're going to talk about ways to support families if you have children of your own and specifics related to COVID. So how do we bring in hard, difficult topics, and how do we build children's resiliency through use of oral language, specifically narrative language interventions? Right, it's a lot, it's pretty heavy, but I promise you'll leave here with some tools and tips and a good feeling. So, known educational impacts of COVID-19. Man, the data that we have to answer like the questions about how have students or how have children specifically been affected by COVID-19 is limited. In this image right here, these are children in India who are attending an open air school rather than inside as a precaution. But as you can see, this is going to impact their ability to access materials, a large whiteboard if you have access to that. So you can see the physical differences between the delivery of education versus also seated and having instructional control, right? So one of the things that comes to mind is without the stimuli that are associated with school and learning, when kids were at home, they've got distractors. So how much education were students able to access? How much information were they able to retain? And what did learning look like, right? So in the Netherlands is probably there's a study that was done in the Netherlands. And it's one of the only studies that we have to date that was looking at a large enough population of students. So there's about 350,000 students that they looked at that they had data available for national exams that took place right before their lockdown. And then they had after lockdown, there was a progress assessment, progress monitoring period where they tested students with the same assessments. And then so that was right before and right after, so that's the same group. And then they had data going back 3 years. So data from the previous 3 years that showed, pre-post gains each school year, right? So their lockdown in that country was relatively short compared to many other countries, and it was 8 weeks. And so students were quarantined at home or in their communities, right, for 8 weeks, no access to in-person schooling. This is also a benefit and not reflective of the equity, right, around or inequity around the world. But they have the world's highest rate of broadband. So I'm laughing because we don't even have that here in the United States. We have some very rural populations and individuals who don't have internet in their homes. And so you've got these pros that are already working for the students in the Netherlands. And their school funding is pretty equitable across schools in the Netherlands. They have about equal amounts of funding. So there's another plus in their little column of what they have going for them. So the results of the pre-post assessments and then comparing them to years prior in absence of pandemic was that students had a learning loss of about 3%. And that's about equivalent to 1/5 of a school year. So here you have students with pretty equal educational opportunities, access to the internet and online instruction. And within that 8-week period, the losses resulted into about a fifth of the school year. So, and that was in reading and math. Now, for students that had lower SES or lower socioeconomic backgrounds, what we also know is we can assume that those those learning losses are larger, and that's what the data did show. They're about 60% larger for students who did not have reliable access to online learning. And if we think about on a global scale, it does confirm our worst fears is that there will be huge gaps, no fault to the students or the children or the individual families. There will be learning gaps based on lack of equity and who has access and who does not to quality education. So the findings are a little bit, I don't know, they imply that we have an issue in terms of the amount of progress students made while learning from home, while everybody was struggling to adapt, and the teachers and everything, we put our hearts and souls right into trying to make it as easy of a transition as possible, while also worried about our own families and our health and safety, trying to prevent learning losses, how to adapt materials to be online, all of these things. I'm actually surprised the gaps or the regression, if we want to call it that, aren't larger. So kudos to us all who are responsible for trying to maintain a little bit of normalcy for these students. So these are a few facts. I'm going to go through the numbers because I didn't give you the data yet, but there was a survey that was three different surveys that were sent out between March 2020 and then April of this year, so April 2021. And surveys were sent to families, one-on-one interviews that researchers had with individual families and students, as well as surveys and interviews with educators in the United States. And the results of those surveys and interviews revealed these statistics. So 17% of school districts in the United States reported that remote learning in 2020, not in 2021, remote learning in 2020 solely focused on content review. So rather than teach new skills or new learning, it was just about maintaining and reviewing what was already taught. Okay, so that's fact number one. Starting then this school year, if you haven't started already, we should note that a lot of students may not have hit all of their grade level competencies that were expected to be hit last school year. So if they did advance, they're going to have some deficits already. Fortunately, 60% of the teachers who are actually the ones implementing the online educational interventions, right? Just trying to teach online, they rated the effectiveness out of a 10. They gave the effectiveness of online learning and their ability to, without any training, mind you, 1 out of 3 stars. So we already know it's not the best, and we did the best with what we were given. So we've got that knowledge. And probably a side effect of the lack of preparation, the stress that was on everybody, the concern and worry for students who we weren't reaching or who dropped off, all communique. About 1 out of 4 teachers plan to leave their jobs by the end of last year. It'll be interesting to see how many do return, but I know anecdotally of several teachers who left and are veteran teachers. And so that was very unfortunate because they have a lot of wealth and knowledge to share, especially in mentoring new teachers. So here is a result of another survey. So this was Curriculum Associates came out with this survey, and I believe it was several thousands of students that took one of their assessments, and they measured 1.5 months of reading skills that were lost on an average. In other words, here's where the students scored right before the schools were closed due to the pandemic. Okay, so they had this level of performance, and then when they were tested again at the end of the school year in the spring, and then again in the fall of 2020, what ended up happening is that they noticed that students actually went down by 1.5 months, which might be related to the aforementioned data points about we're not really teaching new content, we were reviewing, and we didn't really think what we were doing was that effective in teaching new content. So yeah, again, we did the best with what we were given. Hopefully we can do better. And then the final thing, which is kind of what's not to get us down. I feel like we're starting off. This is really depressing. But it's where we're at, is that only about 8% of the schools are actually planning to address student learning loss due to COVID-19. So they have set aside funds to target the regression aspect. And by substantially, meaning it's going to be intentional. So schools, Chesterfield County in Virginia in the United States, it's on the East Coast, in the central part of the state, they have come up with a COVID-19 learning plan that does specifically address money that is going to be spent on remediation programs and supporting teachers who are now inheriting students who didn't even meet, some of the curricular criterion for mastery in their last grade level. The major question that we have is really, are we prepared as educators, as school administrators, specialists, even on my side, which is researchers and consultants, are we really prepared to help students when they've experienced disrupted childhoods? How many of you, in fact, yeah, let's throw that into the chat. I'll monitor. How many of you have started the school year and kind of feel like you, okay, good, raising hands. Just, I'm very curious to see if you notice the influx or the new class, if you notice that their skills are a little bit lower than your previous year. Heather works at a private ABA clinic. Okay, so if you're working in a clinic, you guys were closed at some point too. So yeah, all right. So there's a lot of us who started the year, and I'm sure that you see this. And again, we are just kind of doing the best that we can with what we have. So this whole webinar and the purpose of it, and I'll take some questions a little bit later. The whole purpose of this is to try to think about how do we at least address this potential slide or regression in skills that occurred due to the disrupted education there and take a positive outlook on it rather than just kind of sit here and feel defeated. So the whole remainder of this part of the training is going to focus on, okay, we just need data. So how can we, and I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but we can use the data that we have, but how the heck are we going to get new data that can actually help inform us as to where students are without giving standardized assessments? And we need things that are quick and easy. It'd be great if they're free, which luckily there is such a thing. So we need to make decisions about who needs intervention. If some students, and I'm thinking of, some kids that may have parents who are educators or former educators, and they might have done a little bit better than other kids who don't have such privilege to have educators or individuals who are extremely educated themselves as a preventative measure. So for those students, we may not need to provide the same amount of attention and support for intervention, specifically for reading comprehension and oral language interventions. They may need other things. Now, the ones that do, we need to identify them quickly, and then we need to figure out what they should be taught and then how much. And again, all of this is coming into to all the rules and the guidelines that we have for school and our schedules and our treatment plans, and how much time we have left is probably close to zero to add on anything more to our plates. So in light of that, we're just going to focus on some screeners. We're going to talk about the Pearl as a screener. It's a universal screener. And then we're going to talk about assessing students to kind of get where they are through the narrative language measures, NLM. And that's going to help us identify students who need intervention, what they need in terms of intervention, and then just kind of like a whole class or whole group intervention. So the Pearl is one assessment or screening tool that's available that we provide. If you want more information, it's at languagedynamicsgroup.com. But it is a universal screener. It's like anything else that we offer here at Language Dynamics Group. We're all researchers and believe in evidence-based practices in the science of reading. And so this one right here is something that can be used if we have concerns for really kids' decoding skills and their comprehension skills. So the early learners, those who might just be coming into kindergarten or their first year of school, we might want to use the Pearl in terms of assessing what are we inheriting? What were their families able to provide to them? Do they have any prior experience with reading? Here in the United States, we do not have universal pre-K or preschool. And so that's hit or miss in terms of what students' experiences were. Also in COVID, a lot of those places were shut down. Some were not. So it would be really nice to get a good idea about this, about their skills. And so what the Pearl is a dynamic assessment, basically where you test the student really quick. And then within that same assessment, you teach them said skill, and then you test them immediately after. And it also helps you identify how quickly or how easily can these students learn these things that they are missing in terms of decoding skills, for example. This is an example then of how we can combine the Pearl with step 2, which is going to be our assessing. But as a screener, we use the Pearl, we administer it. And so let's follow on the flow chart. We're going to go the top left, and then we're going to move right. So if we use this Pearl screener and we find out the kids are at risk for language delays, then we're going to move on to, in the next part, I'm going to show you the NLM listening. So narrative language measures, the listening component. If we do the Pearl and then we find out that they're at risk for decoding problems, then a part of the cubed assessment, which contains the NLM, has the DDM, and that's the dynamic decoding measures. So we're going to give them that. Let's say we did not administer the Pearl. We don't have access to it. That might be many of you. In that case, we're going to just jump right into the NLM listening and administer those two things. It's going to be the listening retell and the vocabulary questions. And then it keeps going. Okay. And so this is really preschool, fall of kindergarten, so the start of the school year. If you are a kindergarten or you know, this is the primary first year for students in a structured school, I sometimes recommend it based on your knowledge of the population and the context in which you're teaching. It is also okay to start with the preschool narrative language measures. You know, it's better to be surprised and to underestimate students so that they make contact with success. And we will go over this. And I'll show you what it looks like. But I would rather be surprised than to encounter students who won't make contact with success, and their anxiety is definitely there. They don't want to answer incorrectly, and the kindergarten level might be too hard for them. So we've had this whole, we start off on the wrong foot. So it's better to be surprised that they aced something, not surprised. It's better to have them ace the preschool and then also do the kindergarten narrative language measures than to have to go down to the preschool level. So we've got the screener. If we can use the Pearl, that's great. If you want more information, I would really love you to email me. We also have some webinars on the website already, I believe, about the Pearl. If not, stay tuned. I can always get you some more information. Now, step 2 for how we're going to address the COVID-19, the language slide, right, is to assess. And we have a universal screener that we offer for free on our website, languagedynamicsgroup.com. And the cubed is basically, it's a family. They're a family of listening measures, of reading measures, and then of the dynamic decoding measures, or what we call the DDM. And there are norms available for these too, for those of you who love the data and want to know what the numbers mean if students get some scores. Then you can actually access those on our website as well. But this is going to come, you're going to sign up on our website and download it after you enter in your information. We will not charge you after you enter that in. What may happen is you get on an email list and find out more about these webinars. So, but go ahead and do that if you don't already have a copy. And if you have any problems, just let us know. But 99% positive, everybody I've talked to absolutely loves this, and I do as well. So let's take a look at those. Since they are free, I want everybody to have access to them and to spread the word that they're free, and they look great, and they have norms, and they're evidence-based, and they're grounded in the science of reading. So I can't sing the praises enough. So the decoding one, DDM addresses grade levels from kindergarten to 3rd grade. So the student's first school year all the way up to that 3rd or 4th year if you're in another country. Then we also have the narrative language measures listening. Okay, so the NLM listening, and I apologize if I'm not articulating my N good enough, but I am saying NLM listening. That has preschool through grade 3. The preschool difference, because this is the only one that has a preschool level. And yes, you are so welcome. I think it's Jana Lee. So welcome that it's free. So this is, and that it will always be free. So that one has preschool because it has illustrations that go along with the stories that the students hear. Okay, and then we leave those illustrations out when we're asking them to retell the story that they heard. And so, yeah, that's why the preschool one is unique, but we do go down to preschool because it does have illustrations. Okay, so then the reading, that starts from grade 1 all the way up to 3rd grade. And that's because we don't expect the preschoolers to be reading these stories independently. Right. Get excited about this. I'm going to watch my time. So the cubed, again, just to review it, you've got the NLM listening, and in the bullet points right there, all the things that it measures so that you will get some kind of measure of these students listening retell, so their ability to hear and then retell the information that they heard. Comprehension questions like your WH story questions. So who was the story about? What happened in the story? How did he feel? You're also going to have a vocabulary measure. So what students' ability to, one, use the vocabulary that they heard in the story in their retell, as well as can they make inferences or use context clues to provide a definition of a more advanced vocabulary word, the academic language that we're looking to teach. Okay. And then there's another little item on the NLM listening that's personal story generation. And this looks at what students' ability is to come up with their own story and to construct a cohesive and coherent story based on the theme of the story that they just heard. And it gives us a great opportunity to take language samples, especially if you're lucky enough to have one-on-one opportunities to assess and then audio record them. That's what I recommend. And go back and kind of rate the student's presence of certain story grammar, the macro structure, which is, the structure or the flow of the story, or the micro structure, which is more of the linguistic complexity. So you can measure the students' performance and skills if you can have an audio recorder, but it's not necessary. Now the NLM reading, that one looks at decoding fluency, their ability to read a passage and then retell it to you without the passage in front of them any longer. Story questions like WH that you'll ask them about what they read, vocabulary as well, and then personal writing generation. So again, writing a story about a time that they got hurt. If they just read a story about another child that got hurt, can they write one? So yes, there you go. And this is just a quick look at, okay, where does everything fit in these benchmark timelines? And so we have more information on our website about this, but this just gives you an idea of from preschool. So at the bottom, let me orient you. The bottom, it's preschool through year 1. That's kind of orange, not kind of, it is orange. Then we have kindergarten, which is going to be the purple. And then 1st, 2nd, and then 3rd grade. And what we have is breaking these up into at the beginning of the school year, mid-school year, and at the end of the school year. When do you give these things? This isn't a rule. You can obviously do the NLM measures at any time. It depends on when your baseline is. But I would recommend, if you have any questions, to reach out to us that are specific to your school or your schedule. I'd be happy to answer that for you. Just a quick look at what the NLM reading looks like. This is the form. They're 1-pagers. And so everything that you need to do a little assessment on where kids are in terms of reading comprehension, decoding, all of those things, it's going to be on 1 page. And we have these benchmarks that are a part of the cubed that you would download, and then is organized by grade level. We have 4 stories, and then 3 times of year. So this one right here, I'm going to go ahead and zoom into it. This is the 1st grade benchmark for the NLM reading, and this is story 1, fall. So we have fall, we have winter, and we have spring. So 3 points in time of a traditional fall, winter, spring school year. And so there's 4 stories within each of those seasons. And that way we don't provide the same story to a kid more than once. We want to use multiple exemplars. So let's say a student just kind of breaks down and doesn't want to do it. After we use all the prompts that we possibly can, then what we'll do is just try another story. So now that the 2nd time around or 3rd time around, they know what to expect. They know what we asked them to do last time. They tend to answer, at least give their best shot when it seems familiar now. So all of the information you need to know about how to probe the decoding fluency is at the top. What we ask you to do is everything that you're supposed to say is in bold. And there is a manual for this. Please read the manual that comes with it. But if you need any more information about this, again, just check on our website for some old recorded webinars. This is the bottom of the one-page NLM reading for first grade. And when the student is retelling the information, all you're doing is giving them a score between 2 points if they remembered Brenna's name or they provide any other proper noun, or 1 point if they say a girl or the girl. And what we have rules like if they're using a pronoun, they do not get a point. So that's a 0. So if they just keep talking about she, or they or he, they get 0s. What we're looking for is more advanced recall. Again, I'm going through this fast because I want to get to the other stuff. So this is the last part in the very bottom of the reading, the NLM reading. And so this is the story questions on the left-hand side. And this is where we can look at students' comprehension of what they read. This, by the way, is in front of us. So the stories are printed out for the students and the stories only. You don't give them these pages. And then in front of us, we have this form so we can read it. And then the vocabulary questions and instructions are right in tiny little white print there. If question 1 or question A is, you ask that first, so it's in bold. So you would ask Brenna and her friend collaborated, they both made a house. What does collaborate mean? And if the student gives you a great, answer that's sufficient, then you would give them a 3. If it's kind of unclear, or if it's they give the same answer that you just said, like collaborate means they both made a house, you're going to say, what else does collaborate mean? And you might not get the best answer again, so you would give a 2. But if a student says, I don't know, or they're like way off track, then you're going to ask, and only then would you ask question B, which is basically a forced choice. Does collaborate mean to work together or to fight? And at that point, if you ask those questions, the QBs, the student can only get a 1 or a 0. So you only are really giving a score for these 3 words. You can only have a score for each word between 0 and 3. So don't ask question B if you don't need to. That's what I'm getting at. So NLM listening looks very similar. This is another one-pager, but this one, the student doesn't have anything in front of them. They're sitting there, and you are reading the story to them, and then also then scoring as they provide the retell to you, and then they answer story questions as well as the vocabulary. So the bottom, the top part and the bottom parts are very similar across both the listening and the reading. And so just briefly go over this. This listening retell obviously doesn't have a decoding measure, but you're really looking at the child's ability to retell that same story and what story grammar markers, what do they remember? What key components are they able to include in their retells? Okay. Again, so like this is the more complex one. You're scoring while they're retelling. So you score in real time. And then story questions and vocabulary questions. This one right here, so with the listening, you just ask them to tell a story about a time that they also were scared. But we provide that prompt for you, and then we provide the rubric to score those as well, that are great. And the writing one as well, rubric's also wonderful. So, okay. So in summary, the data-based decision-making that we're going to do, we have the access to the Pearl, which is beautiful measure and a tool. If we don't have access to the Pearl, the Cubed, again, is free online. Download it, use it, get familiar with it. It's wonderful. Tell your friends about it. It's free because it needs to get out there, and people who don't have access to evidence-based practices in terms of assessment, we want them to have it, and we don't want money to be a barrier for these kids. So in summary, we want to use these things to figure out who needs intervention. What do they need an intervention with? So if my cubed assessments come back with information that the child clearly cannot retell a story that they heard, or tell me a story and retell information about what they read with all story grammar parts, then that's where I need to start. I don't need to necessarily work on vocabulary or linguistic complexity, any of that stuff, if I can't even get the child to tell a cohesive and coherent story. It'll be hard for me to grade if I can't even get that. And so that directly relates to how we're going to work on transitioning students. One day, hopefully, with the pandemic is no longer a thing and we all look back at it and it's history, but we all hope, right? But the ability even for us to make sense means that we have to have the skills to put all of this information and our experiences into a cohesive and coherent narrative. And so this is why we need to have students learn the skills of how to tell a good story, because it will in turn affect them. And I'll go over some data. And so we want you to use those things to basically create and develop your observable, measurable goals for targeted treatment so that it is meaningful to them and it will generate to other areas of their life that will help them with coping and resilience. So the third item, how many of you, raise your hand if you have Story Champs? Have you used Story Champs? Shown, okay. All right. A few who have not, a lot, which hopefully, okay. All right, you can put your hand down, but I'm hoping that if you have it, great, Sophia, right? You have it, you've used it, you can sing the praises. We are going to start a Facebook group, y'all, like, not we, I'm gonna get that going by Sunday. And so we're gonna have a community of practice where we can, you can talk and access the experts, myself, Dr. Trina Spencer, Doug Peterson, the doctors. You'll have access to them so we can answer some questions, but also you all can share with each other some ideas that you have, especially during this crazy time that we're in. So this Story Champs intervention, we do have some clinics. I have some clinics in Seattle, Miami, and these are in the US, Seattle, Miami, and Hawaii that I know of that use Story Champs for their students with autism that they come into the clinic. And that's great, generally, that's great. So I'm excited because we have behavior analysts who are finally learning about it and then including this direct instruction program into their practice. But really, most of the people I've interacted who have Story Champs or I've used it have been actually first, they're speech and language pathologists. And that community has been wonderful. And promoting it and really sharing with us all of the success stories, as well as our school teachers. So yeah, it's not something it was developed by a behavior analyst, and yet we're the last ones, I myself am one, last ones to learn about it. It's crazy. Okay, so it's a multi-tiered intervention. We love it in terms of practice and working with kids to teach them how to tell stories. We do have a digital presentation link. So if you have Story Champs and you're unable to use the digital, like the computer ready presentation, the images because of Flash or something on your flash drive, you're unable to use them, please let us know. At the end of this presentation, I'll throw in the link to it. But again, like we can't, for those of you that don't have Story Champs, you're not gonna be able to use it because you don't have the intervention and know how to implement the lesson plan. So it is imperative that you don't go rogue and use those illustrations. You need the kit. It is for diverse students and pre-K through third grades, and we designed it so that it could be implemented. The lesson plans could be followed by paraprofessionals with high school diplomas, as well as parents. And then the effectiveness and the evidence that we have, which just keeps growing and growing, to put it simply, it works for students with autism. It works for our dual language learners. It works for our kids with language delays, and it works for our students in large group settings in general education who are on level but need to develop these skills, because otherwise, how are they going to learn them? No one's teaching it besides Story Champs. This is what the kit looks like. So if you haven't bought it, selling you on it. There's so many things that come with it, and that training is for another day. So, all right, here's the meat of the rest of our presentation. Just like one size doesn't fit all when it pertains to education, we've been figuring things out on our own. The flexibility of oral language instruction, especially the intervention in narrative language, will allow us the opportunity to tailor stories that are going to be culturally, linguistically, and then contextually, meaning like contemporaneously. Right now, we have this pandemic going on. We can tailor stories to help students make sense of their experiences and do so in a way that is appropriate both developmentally for their age and what their ability to understand and comprehend, especially if they've experienced a death in the family, or they're watching the news and they see like these horrible, they see the rates of COVID going up in images, to help them process and make sense of those experiences, whether lived directly or indirectly through exposure to the media or conversations from adults that are being had in the background. Kids aren't stupid, they listen. I would go ahead and recommend that this is where we bring in storytelling. So here's one example I'm going to show you of the power of story champs as an intervention. This is Dr. Garcia, and we were doing a study of implementing story champs online remotely. And this individual, the student, has autism, and in the beginning was not able to share a personal story or personal experience. Okay, and then my heart breaks a little bit, but we'll be here with some tissues. Can you all hear that? Making sure. Okay, didn't think so. All right, hold on. There we go. All right.
When I was going into second grade, the kids in the class made fun of me, but I felt embarrassed because I had to 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 ask the teacher that the students can stop teasing me. I said, teacher, can you let the students stop teasing me, please? And the teacher said, sure. But after the teacher asked all of her students to stop teasing Brandon, me, and I felt happy because I've been never teased again.
Okay, well, that delay was great. So hopefully you were able to hear the story and didn't focus on, Dr. Garcia's face. It looked like she was telling the story. But basically, you've had a student with autism who was able to self-advocate for himself, right? So Story Champs helped him understand how to ask the teacher for help, but he was able to also communicate that back to an adult, right? So also the power of storytelling has been extended to what we know about resilience and how kids cope with adverse childhood experiences. So post-hurricane, and then again at 6-year follow-up, children who experienced Hurricane Katrina initially recalled more information about the hurricane. So if they were able to process and talk about their experience, their lived experience about the hurricane without being coached to do so, those who are able to do so in a coherent and cohesive manner, so all the parts of the story when they were telling someone else about the hurricane, they actually showed better psychological outcomes 6 years later. So those who experienced higher stress, and in addition to, were unable to share as much information. So they shared less information in a free recall. They had bits and pieces. It wasn't coherent. It didn't have a logical flow to the event. They used a lot more negative emotion language, and higher cognitive processing words like decided or considered. However, when it came down to the story content, if they had fewer story grammar components, they had higher stress levels and indicators still 6 years later. So basically what it comes down to, even after 6 years, students who have strong oral narrative skills are more likely to show a wider repertoire of emotions, not just sad, angry, upset. They have a wider repertoire of emotional vocabulary, and they have better psychological outcomes than those students who cannot tell personal stories with all the components. What we also know is that as studies in 2010 and that are continuing 2017, 18, students who are taught to use personal narratives about their experiences with migration or immigration, who are able to be taught how to construct a coherent narrative about their experiences. These individuals must receive this intervention. Otherwise, what ends up happening is that those who are newly arrived to a country aren't able to develop that coherent narrative about their experience, and thus it impacts their ability to cope with what has happened or make sense as to what has happened to them. In addition, they're less likely to look at it as overcoming something. So what individuals have done in the past in terms of narrative intervention, especially oral language, by teaching individuals, young kids, how to tell a story about their history or about their family, not necessarily prompting them to talk about their migratory experience, unless you have mental health professionals available in case that brings up some traumatic experiences. But what it does is help them construct a coherent narrative about resilience, about things that they've overcome, and the ability to share that helps them connect with others. So there's lots and lots of research about that, and a whole branch of research called narrative therapy. So again, oh, sorry, here's my students who are writing about that. So when we get down to it, here's what we can do in terms of COVID-19 and related conversations. Tip number 1 is not to assume that students know anything about COVID unless you have been the one to share it with them. But before you do that, I recommend that you find out what the student or the child already knows. We don't want to create more anxiety and concern or worry for them if we're sharing something about like the Delta variant. Now that kid wasn't even worried or aware of that. And now we've just added to their plate in terms of what things to worry about. So what you can first do is tell me everything you know about COVID, or can you tell me everything you know about why we're staying home? So teachers can really reassure their students by getting information first about where kids are and what they know, what they might be worried about, following their lead about what they want to talk about. And so not just like, we'll see in a video in a little bit about examples of that in terms of directing children to talk about certain things. Identify any missing or misinformation, disinformation. So by listening to tell me everything that you know about COVID, doing a tell me about is not a yes and no question. So we're allowing them and we're opening up the conversation to a platform that they're leading us or they're leading the conversation. And then we are responding to it based on what they want to talk about. A lot of kids may not want to talk about what it's like to stay home. They focus on how awesome it was to stay home because they had video games. Go with it. I mean, that's what their association with it is. And so we don't want to really ruin their memories if it's a positive one. Also, we need to set an example by talking about our own feelings. Most adults do not talk about their own feelings or experiences even in a measured way. And so therefore students or children are not. And so when we are recommending this to families, it's all culturally, and like by culture, I mean like the family's culture. We need to leave it up to them as to what they feel comfortable talking with, or talking about. But it's not a good thing to hide that or to avoid talking about something like a negative experience, because children will then create their own or construct their own understanding, and usually it's wrong. So if we're not talking about things, it's not that if the students or the children are not going to worry, they will, and it'll probably be worse because we're not talking. We're sheltering them a little bit too much, where we need to provide honest information. And sometimes we need to just say, I don't know. I don't have an answer, and then possibly look together for an answer. And then the 5th one is talk about current events. So not just about COVID and the pandemic, but how often are we talking about all different sorts of events through storytelling and helping students make sense of what's going on in the news or the world around them. So a lot of families or us ourselves will avoid, exposure to the news because of majority negative things, but that doesn't mean that children are unaware of what's going on in the world. If not, unless they're with you 24/7 and you're monitoring every little thing these days on between TikTok and social media and overhearing their friends, as well as in school conversations, overhearing adult conversations, radio, can go on and on about all the other ways that, yes, they kind of have an understanding that there's a larger world around them, right? So in this next slide, I'm going to show you kind of about one parent's attempt to early on. This is in, I believe, May or June of 2020. So during the lockdown, this is one parent's kind of talk with their child about COVID.
Tell me about a time that you felt upset about the virus
It's a little bit. There we go.
closing something down. What was closed because of the virus?
The trampoline park.
Oh my gosh, the trampoline park?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, so you couldn't go.
Yeah.
What else?
But were you there?
I've been there before. Have you been there before?
Yeah.
Oh, and tell me, what do you think you'll do at the trampoline park when it's open again?
Do the basketball, but the basketball's really hard.
The basketball's really
Loading.
hard. And can I tell you something?
Yeah.
Sometimes there are places that I want to go that are also closed because of the virus. Is that a pain? Oh my goodness. How does that make you feel when all the places are closed?
Mad.
So mad? Where do you feel the madness in your body? Right here?
Yeah.
Like right here?
Yeah.
And right here?
Yeah.
And right here?
Yeah.
And do you feel it here?
No.
Do you feel it here?
No.
Here? Here? Oh my goodness. And what do you do to make yourself feel happy after?
The virus is over and we can play.
You think about when the virus is over?
Yeah.
And you can play?
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing with me. Tell me.
So that's just one example. And then save another example for another day. But I have another parent who kind of leads their child into a question or into answering a certain way, and it was about masks. So I was going to show you what not to do. That's for another day. Okay. So do any of you have any questions? I can stay on for a little bit longer, but I'm going to go ahead and put my email up here for you. It's megan.kirby@languagedynamicsgroup.com. It's all like, I'll spell it all out. And I thank you for coming. But if you have any questions or needs or really want more information about the products that I talked about today, or extensions or activities or what other people are doing, feel free to email me. I'll connect you. We are in training season for school districts. So between that, also, if you need some trainings for your school district, let me know. We can hook you up with that as well. But thank you so much for your